The Arizona sun beat down mercilessly on the cracked asphalt of the Circle K parking lot, the kind of heat that made the air shimmer and dance above the pavement like ghosts. It was June 14th, 2002, just past 3 in the afternoon, and 23-year-old Sarah Martinez stood at the payphone outside the convenience store, receiver pressed against her ear, listening to the endless ringing on the other end. She'd called her mother 3 times already. No answer. The heat was making her dizzy, or maybe it was the fact that she hadn't eaten since breakfast, or maybe it was something else entirely, something she couldn't quite name, a feeling that had been following her for days now, like a shadow that grew longer even as the sun climbed higher. Behind her, through the store's smudged glass doors, she could see the clerk restocking cigarettes, oblivious. A truck rumbled past on the highway, heading north toward Flagstaff. Sarah hung up the phone. She'd try again later. She turned toward her car, an old blue Honda Civic with a dent in the passenger door and a rear window that didn't roll up all the way, parked in the shade of the building's overhang. She never made it to the driver's side door. In the security camera footage that would be reviewed hundreds of times over the next decade, you can see her take 4 steps toward her vehicle. Then there's a white van, no plates visible, pulling up too close, too fast. Then there's nothing. The camera angle doesn't capture it. The clerk inside heard nothing. When Sarah's mother, Rosa Martinez, finally returned her daughter's calls an hour later, the phone in the Circle K parking lot rang and rang into the empty desert air. By then, Sarah was already miles away, already vanished into the vast and unforgiving landscape of northern Arizona, already becoming another statistic, another face on a missing person poster, another family's nightmare that would stretch across years and years of unanswered questions and sleepless nights. If my story resonates with you, please hit the like button to bring a little light to this father's heart. Subscribe to the channel so you don't miss my upcoming life stories, and tell me in the comments where you're watching this video from and what time it is there right now. It makes me so happy to know what corner of the country or world you're listening from. Sarah Elena Martinez was born on a cool October evening in 1978 in Phoenix, Arizona, the second daughter of Rosa and Miguel Martinez. She grew up in a modest neighborhood on the east side of the city, where jacaranda trees lined the streets, and neighbors knew each other's names. She was the kind of girl who collected stray cats and painted watercolors and wrote poetry in spiral notebooks she kept hidden under her mattress. By the time she was 23, she was working 2 jobs to save money for community college, dreaming of becoming a veterinary technician. She had her mother's dark eyes and her father's quiet determination. She loved hiking in the Superstition Mountains and making carne asada with her grandmother on Sundays and singing along to Selena in her car with the windows down. The town of Cottonwood, where Sarah had been visiting a friend that June day in 2002, was a small community nestled in the Verde Valley, a place where red rocks rose from the earth like ancient sentinels, and the Verde River carved its way through the landscape. It was the kind of place where people moved to escape the chaos of bigger cities, where the pace of life was slower, where everyone assumed they were safe. That assumption would be shattered on June 14th, 2002, and it would take more than a decade for the community to even begin to heal. That morning had started like any other for Sarah. She'd woken at 6:30 in her small apartment in Phoenix, made coffee in the percolator her grandmother had given her, fed her cat Dulcie, and dressed in jeans and a yellow tank top. She'd worked the early shift at the diner on McDowell Road, serving breakfast to truckers and construction workers and retirees who came in for the cheap coffee and free refills. Her feet ached by the time her shift ended at noon. She'd clocked out, waved goodbye to Maria the cook, and driven north on Interstate 17 toward Cottonwood, windows down, radio playing. She was going to visit her friend Jessica, a girl she'd known since high school who'd moved to Cottonwood the year before with her boyfriend. They were planning to go swimming in Oak Creek, to spend the afternoon in the cool water under the cottonwood trees. Sarah had packed a swimsuit and sunscreen and a bag of peanut butter cookies she'd made the night before. She'd told her mother she'd be home by 10 that evening. "Don't wait up," she'd said, kissing Rosa on the cheek. "I'll be fine, Mum. I'm just going swimming." Those were the last words Rosa Martinez heard her daughter speak in person. Sarah arrived in Cottonwood around 1:30. She met Jessica at a coffee shop downtown, and they talked for an hour about nothing important. Jessica's boyfriend was working late. They decided to postpone the swimming trip until the next day. Sarah didn't mind. She walked around downtown for a while, browsed the antique shops, bought a turquoise bracelet from a street vendor. At 3 o'clock, she realized she was low on gas and stopped at the Circle K on the highway. She filled her tank, paid inside with cash, bought a bottle of water and a pack of gum. That's when she tried calling her mother, standing in that shimmering heat, listening to the phone ring and ring. That's when the white van appeared. That's when Sarah Martinez vanished from the face of the earth. Rosa Martinez knew something was wrong before she even knew it. It's a mother's intuition, that animal awareness that something has shifted in the universe, that the child you carried in your body is in danger. When 10 o'clock came and went with no sign of Sarah, Rosa felt her chest tighten. When 11 passed, she called Sarah's cell phone. It went straight to voicemail. By midnight, Rosa was pacing the living room, rosary beads clicking through her trembling fingers, while Miguel called hospitals and police stations. At 1 in the morning, they filed a missing person report with the Phoenix Police Department. The officer who took their report was kind, but realistic. "She's 23, he said gently. "She's an adult. She probably just lost track of time. Give it 24 hours. Most people turn up. But Sarah didn't turn up in 24 hours. She didn't turn up in 48 hours. By the third day, search parties were combing the roads between Phoenix and Cottonwood. Volunteers hanging flyers on every light post and store window, Rosa's face aging years in a matter of days. The Phoenix PD connected with Yavapai County Sheriff's Office, and the case officially became a multi-jurisdictional investigation. Jessica, Sarah's friend, was interviewed extensively. She provided the timeline, the last known sighting, the decision to postpone swimming. She felt guilty irrationally for not going with Sarah to the gas station, for not insisting she stay longer in Cottonwood. The guilt would eat at her for years. Meanwhile, investigators obtained the security footage from the Circle K. The image quality was grainy, typical of 2002 surveillance technology, but you could see Sarah clearly enough, see her talking on the phone, see her turning toward her car, see the white van. The problem was you couldn't see a license plate, you couldn't see a driver. You couldn't see what happened after Sarah took those 4 steps. The van pulled up, and then it drove away. And when the clerk finally noticed Sarah's car still sitting there hours later, empty and abandoned, with her purse still locked inside and her keys in the ignition, he called the police. By then, Sarah was already a ghost. The investigation in those early days was frantic and exhaustive. Detectives interviewed everyone who'd been at the Circle K that afternoon. The clerk, a 19-year-old kid named Danny who'd been working there for 3 months, remembered Sarah coming in to pay for gas. She seemed normal, he said, maybe a little tired. She smiled at me. The detective interviewing him, a veteran named Robert Chen, who'd worked missing persons cases for 15 years, asked Danny if he'd noticed the white van. Danny shook his head. "I see 100 vehicles a day," he said. "I don't pay attention unless someone's causing trouble." There were no other witnesses. The trucker who'd driven past on the highway didn't stop. The handful of other customers who'd been in the store that hour were tracked down and interviewed. None of them remembered seeing Sarah or the van. It was as if she'd been plucked from the earth by invisible hands. Detective Chen coordinated with the FBI, and Sarah's case was entered into the National Crime Information Center database. Her face appeared on the news, in newspapers, on missing person websites that were just beginning to proliferate in the early days of widespread internet access. Tips came in, dozens of them. Someone thought they saw a girl matching Sarah's description at a truck stop in New Mexico. Someone else claimed to have seen her in Las Vegas, walking down the Strip at night. Every lead was followed, every tip was investigated. All of them led nowhere. The white van became an obsession. Detectives compiled lists of every white van registered in Arizona, cross-referenced them with criminal records, interviewed owners. It was an impossible task. There were thousands of white vans, and the one in the footage could have come from Nevada or California, or been stolen or unregistered. It was a ghost van as elusive as Sarah herself had become. Miguel Martinez, a man who'd worked in construction his entire adult life, a man who'd built houses with his own hands, found himself helpless in a way he'd never experienced before. He couldn't build his daughter back. He couldn't fix this. He spent his days driving the highways between Phoenix and Cottonwood, stopping at every gas station, every rest stop, every small town, showing Sarah's picture, asking if anyone had seen her. Most people shook their heads sadly. Some promised to keep an eye out. Miguel developed a ritual. Every Sunday he drove to the Circle K in Cottonwood, parked in the same spot where Sarah's car had been found, and sat there for an hour, as if through sheer force of will he could turn back time, could be there the moment she needed him, could stop the white van from ever arriving. Rosa Martinez stopped sleeping in the months after Sarah disappeared. She kept Sarah's bedroom exactly as it had been, the bed made, the watercolor paintings still tacked to the walls, the spiral notebook still hidden under the mattress. Rosa read them late at night, her daughter's poetry, her daughter's dreams written in purple ink, and wept silently so as not to wake Miguel. She kept Sarah's cell phone charged, called it once a day just to hear her daughter's voice on the voicemail greeting. "Hi, you've reached Sarah. Leave me a message, and I'll call you back." Except she wouldn't call back. She couldn't. Rosa went to church every morning, lit candles, prayed to every saint she could name. She organized vigils in the park near their house, where Sarah used to play as a child. Dozens of people came, holding candles as the sun set, singing hymns, praying for Sarah's safe return. As weeks became months, the crowds grew smaller. People had their own lives, their own problems. Sarah was becoming a memory, a tragedy that happened to someone else. But for Rosa, every morning she woke up was another morning without her daughter. Every meal she cooked was haunted by Sarah's empty chair at the table. Every birthday that passed, every Christmas, every Mother's Day, was a fresh wound that never healed. Meanwhile, the investigation was running into dead ends at every turn. Detective Chen worked Sarah's case obsessively for the first year, following every lead, chasing every phantom. He interviewed known sex offenders in the area, looked into cases with similar patterns, coordinated with other agencies on unsolved disappearances. There were some similarities to other cases, young women who'd vanished from gas stations or rest stops in the Southwest during the late 90s and early 2000s, but nothing concrete enough to establish a pattern or link them definitively. The FBI's Behavioral Analysis Unit compiled a profile of the likely suspect, a white male between 30 and 50, organized, methodical, someone who'd likely offended before. But a profile without a name is just a ghost. By the end of 2003, Sarah's case had gone cold. Chen was assigned new cases. Sarah's file went into a box in the archives of the Yavapai County Sheriff's Office, one of hundreds of unsolved cases, one more missing woman in a country where thousands of women disappear every year. But Rosa Martinez refused to let her daughter become a statistic. She kept Sarah's face in the public eye, gave interviews to local news stations on the anniversary of Sarah's disappearance, maintained a website with Sarah's information and photos, hoping someone, somewhere, would remember something, would come forward with that one piece of information that would crack the case open. The years crawled by with agonizing slowness. 2004, 2005, 2006. Sarah would have been 26, 27, 28. Rosa imagined what her daughter would look like now, whether she'd have gone to college, whether she'd have fallen in love, whether she'd have children of her own. Miguel stopped driving to the Circle K every Sunday. It was too painful, too much a reminder of his failure to protect his daughter. He threw himself into work instead, took on extra jobs, worked until his body ached and his mind was too exhausted to think. But at night, in the darkness of their bedroom, he'd lie awake and listen to Rosa crying softly beside him, and he'd feel the weight of his helplessness pressing down on his chest like a stone. Their older daughter, Carmen, who'd been 25 when Sarah disappeared, tried to hold the family together. She called her parents every day, visited every weekend, organized family dinners that everyone attended but no one enjoyed. She got married in 2005, and there was an empty seat at the wedding, a place set for Sarah that no one sat in. Carmen had her first child in 2007, a daughter she named Elena, after Sarah's middle name. Rosa held her granddaughter and smiled, but the smile never reached her eyes. There was always a part of Rosa that was still standing in that Circle K parking lot, waiting for her daughter to answer the phone. In the community of Cottonwood, Sarah's disappearance left a scar that never fully healed. Parents held their children tighter. Women stopped traveling alone. The Circle K installed better security cameras, but it was too little, too late. The case was discussed in hushed tones at the coffee shop downtown, became part of the local law, a cautionary tale. But as the years passed, fewer and fewer people remembered. The street vendor who'd sold Sarah the turquoise bracelet moved away. The antique shops changed hands. Jessica, Sarah's friend, eventually left Cottonwood too, unable to shake the guilt and the memories. Only the old-timers remembered, and even for them, Sarah became a story they told, not a person they'd known. The white van was never found. The driver was never identified. Sarah's Honda Civic was eventually released from the evidence impound and returned to the Martinez family. Miguel couldn't bring himself to drive it, couldn't even look at it. It sat in their driveway for months before Carmen finally arranged to have it sold. The money went into a reward fund that Rosa had established, offering $25,000 for information leading to Sarah's whereabouts. The fund grew slowly over the years, augmented by donations from the community, from church fundraisers, from strangers who'd heard Sarah's story and wanted to help. But no information came. The reward went unclaimed. Sarah remained missing, and the case remained cold. Then, in 2010, something changed, not in Sarah's case specifically, but in the field of forensic science. DNA technology had been advancing rapidly throughout the previous decade, and law enforcement agencies across the country were beginning to re-examine old cold cases with new tools. The Yavapai County Sheriff's Office received a grant to review unsolved cases, to retest evidence with modern techniques, to upload DNA profiles to national databases that hadn't existed when the crimes were originally investigated. Sarah's case was among those selected for review. There wasn't much physical evidence to retest. Sarah's car had yielded nothing of value, no unknown fingerprints, no hair or fibers that didn't belong to Sarah or her family. But there was one small detail that had been overlooked in the original investigation, or rather, had been noted but not fully explored. When Sarah's purse was processed, investigators found a small tear in the leather strap, as if it had been grabbed forcefully. They'd swabbed the area, but in 2002, the DNA analysis was rudimentary, and the sample was too degraded to produce a useful profile. In 2010, with improved extraction and amplification techniques, the lab tried again. This time they got a hit. A partial DNA profile, not enough to identify someone on its own, but enough to be entered into the Combined DNA Index System, CODIS, the FBI's national DNA database. And then they waited. The profile sat in the system for 3 years. Meanwhile, across the country, police departments were uploading more and more profiles, both from crime scenes and from convicted offenders. The database grew exponentially, and in September 2013, there was a match. The match came from an unlikely source. A man named Dale Edward Pritchard had been arrested in Nevada for a parole violation, something minor, a technical offense that would have resulted in a few months in county jail at most. But as part of his processing, his DNA was collected and entered into CODIS. The system flagged it as a potential match to the partial profile from Sarah Martinez's purse. The probability was high, though not absolute. The Yavapai County Sheriff's Office was notified immediately. Detective Chen, who'd been promoted to sergeant by then, but had never forgotten Sarah's case, got the call on a Tuesday morning. He felt his heart rate accelerate as he listened to the lab technician explain the match. After all these years, after all the dead ends, they had a name: Dale Edward Pritchard. Chen ran a background check. Pritchard was 54 years old, born in Reno, Nevada, with a criminal history that read like a nightmare. Burglary in the 80s, assault in the 90s, a conviction for attempted kidnapping in 1998, for which he'd served 5 years before being paroled in 2003. He'd been living in Flagstaff, Arizona in 2002, just 40 miles north of Cottonwood. He owned a white van. Chen felt the pieces clicking into place, felt the surge of hope and anger and grim satisfaction that came with finally having a suspect. But having a suspect and proving a case were two different things. Pritchard was brought in for questioning. He was a large man, balding, with cold blue eyes and a smirk that never quite left his face. He denied everything. "I never met Sarah Martinez," he said. "I don't know anything about her disappearance. The DNA must be a mistake." But Chen knew it wasn't a mistake. The problem was a partial DNA match wasn't enough for a murder conviction, not without a body, not without additional evidence. And Sarah's body had never been found. The investigation shifted into high gear. Pritchard's life was dissected. Every address he'd lived at, every job he'd worked, every vehicle he'd owned. Detectives interviewed his ex-wives, of which there were 3, his former employers, his parole officers. A picture emerged of a man with a history of violence against women, a man who'd been suspected, but never charged in other disappearances in the 90s. The white van he'd owned in 2002 had been sold in 2004 to a junkyard where it was crushed and recycled. That avenue was a dead end, but there was another lead. One of Pritchard's ex-wives, a woman named Linda, who'd divorced him in 2005, came forward voluntarily. She'd seen the news about his arrest in connection with Sarah's case, and she wanted to talk. She told detectives about a property Pritchard had owned in the early 2000s, a remote parcel of land in the high desert east of Flagstaff, near the Painted Desert. "He used to go there," she said. "He told me he went there to hunt, but I never saw him bring back any game. He'd disappear for days at a time. I was always afraid to ask too many questions, afraid of what I might find out." Chen and his team obtained a search warrant. In November 2013, they drove out to the property, a desolate stretch of land surrounded by juniper and sagebrush, with a small trailer that was falling apart and a scattering of outbuildings. The property had been abandoned for years, foreclosed on and left to decay. The search took 3 days. Cadaver dogs were brought in. On the afternoon of the 3rd day, one of the dogs alerted near a dry wash about 100 yards from the trailer. The team began to dig. 6 feet down, wrapped in a tarp and buried in the red earth, they found Sarah Martinez. The news hit the Martinez family like a physical blow. Rosa had always held on to hope, some small, irrational part of her that believed Sarah might still be alive somewhere, might still come home. The confirmation of Sarah's death shattered that hope, but it also brought a strange, terrible relief. At least now they knew. At least now Sarah could come home. The medical examiner determined that Sarah had been dead since 2002, likely within hours of her disappearance. The cause of death was strangulation. Chen called Miguel and Rosa personally to inform them, and he wept as he spoke. This veteran detective, who'd seen so much death and suffering, wept for this family who'd waited 11 years for answers, wept for Sarah who'd never gotten to live the life she'd dreamed of. Rosa asked only one question. Did she suffer? Chen hesitated, then lied, a merciful lie. "I don't think so," he said. It was quick. Rosa nodded, clutching the phone, and whispered a prayer of gratitude that her daughter's pain had been brief, even as her own pain threatened to consume her. Dale Edward Pritchard was charged with first-degree murder, kidnapping and tampering with evidence. His trial began in May 2014 in the Yavapai County Superior Court in Prescott. The prosecution's case was built on the DNA evidence, the testimony of Linda, the ex-wife, the discovery of Sarah's body on property that Pritchard had owned, and a painstaking reconstruction of his movements in June 2002. They brought in witnesses who placed Pritchard in Cottonwood on the day Sarah disappeared, who remembered seeing a white van matching his at a gas station near the Circle K. They presented evidence of his prior crimes, his pattern of targeting young women. The defense argued that the DNA evidence was inconclusive, that Pritchard's van was one of thousands of white vans, that the property where Sarah was found had been abandoned and anyone could have buried a body there. But the jury didn't buy it. The testimony of Linda Pritchard was particularly damning. She described her ex-husband's rage, his obsession with control, the fear she'd lived with throughout their marriage. She'd left him in 2005, she said, because she was afraid she'd end up like one of the women who disappeared. The implication was clear. The trial lasted 6 weeks. Rosa and Miguel attended every day, sitting in the front row, staring at the man who'd stolen their daughter from them. Pritchard never showed remorse. He smirked through the testimony, laughed at some of the evidence, treated the proceedings like a joke. On July 2, 2014, after 8 hours of deliberation, the jury returned a verdict: guilty on all counts. The courtroom erupted. Rosa collapsed into Miguel's arms, sobbing, 12 years of grief and rage and relief pouring out of her all at once. Carmen held her mother, and together the three of them cried for Sarah, for the years they'd lost, for the justice that had finally come. Sentencing was held a month later. The prosecution sought the death penalty, but Arizona law required certain aggravating factors. And while the crime was heinous, Pritchard had no prior murder convictions. The judge sentenced him to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Miguel Martinez was allowed to give a victim impact statement. He stood at the podium, this quiet man who'd spent his life building things, and spoke in a voice that shook with emotion. "You took my daughter from me," he said, looking directly at Pritchard. "You took her future, her dreams, her life. You took her from her mother, who loved her more than anything in this world. You took her from her sister, who still sets a place for her at family dinners. You took her from a niece who will never know her aunt. You stole 12 years of our lives. 12 years we spent searching and hoping and grieving. I hope you spend every day of the rest of your miserable life thinking about what you did. I hope Sarah haunts your dreams. I hope you never know peace." Pritchard stared back, expressionless. But as he was led out of the courtroom in shackles, something flickered across his face. Not remorse exactly, but perhaps the first real understanding that his freedom was gone, that he would die in a prison cell, that he'd lost. Rosa didn't make a statement in court. She'd said everything she needed to say in the privacy of her home, in her prayers, in the conversations she'd had with Sarah's memory for 12 long years. But outside the courthouse, surrounded by reporters and cameras, she spoke briefly. "Today we got justice for Sarah," she said, her voice steady despite the tears streaming down her face. "But justice doesn't bring her back. Justice doesn't give me back the daughter I lost. All I can hope is that Sarah is at peace now, that she's with the angels, and that she knows we never stopped looking for her, that we never stopped loving her. I want to thank everyone who helped us, who searched, who prayed, who never gave up. And I want to tell every parent out there, hold your children close. Tell them you love them. Life is precious and fragile, and we never know when it will be taken from us." The community of Cottonwood held a memorial service for Sarah in August 2014 at the small park along the Verde River, where she'd planned to go swimming that day in 2002. Hundreds of people attended, many who'd never met Sarah, but who'd followed her case, who'd seen her face on the news, who'd felt the weight of her loss. There were flowers and candles and photographs. Jessica, Sarah's friend, spoke about the girl she'd known, the girl who loved animals and art and life, the girl whose laughter could light up a room. "I've carried guilt for 12 years, Jessica said, her voice breaking. "Guilt that I wasn't with her, that I didn't protect her, that I lived and she died. But I know Sarah wouldn't want me to carry that guilt. She'd want me to live, to be happy, to make the most of the life I have. And so I'm trying. I'm trying to honor her memory by living fully, by being kind, by helping others. That's what Sarah would have done." The Martinez family planted a tree in the park that day, a young cottonwood that would grow tall and strong, its leaves rustling in the wind that swept down from the red rocks. A plaque was placed at its base, in memory of Sarah Elena Martinez, 1978-2002, beloved daughter, sister, friend, forever in our hearts. Rosa stood in front of that plaque for a long time after everyone else had left, her hand on the rough bark of the tree, and she spoke to her daughter one last time. "You're home now, baby," she whispered. "You're finally home." In the years since the trial, the Martinez family has slowly, painfully begun to heal. Rosa still keeps Sarah's room as it was, still lights candles on the anniversary of her daughter's disappearance, but the weight of not knowing has been lifted. She knows where Sarah is now. She visits the cemetery where Sarah is buried every Sunday after church, brings fresh flowers, sits on the grass beside the headstone, and talks to her daughter about everything and nothing. Miguel went back to work, threw himself into building again, and found that the act of creation, of making something solid and real with his hands, helped ease the ache in his chest. He built a workshop in their backyard, and started making furniture, beautiful pieces of oak and pine that he donated to local charities, to churches, to families in need. Every piece he makes is a tribute to Sarah, a way of putting something good into a world that took his daughter from him. Carmen had another child in 2016, a son she named Miguel after his grandfather. Her children ask about Aunt Sarah sometimes, and Carmen tells them stories, keeps their aunt's memory alive, teaches them to be kind and careful and aware of the dangers that exist in the world. The family still gathers for dinners, and there's still an empty space where Sarah should be. But they've learned to carry their grief without being destroyed by it. They've learned that healing doesn't mean forgetting, that you can honor the dead by living fully, by choosing hope over despair, by finding meaning in the midst of loss. The case of Sarah Martinez changed things in Arizona and beyond. Her story became part of the push for better missing person protocols, for improved DNA databases, for more resources devoted to cold cases. Detective Robert Chen, who retired in 2018, spent his final years on the force training other detectives in cold case investigation techniques. He speaks about Sarah's case often, uses it as an example of why you should never give up, why every case matters, why every victim deserves justice no matter how much time has passed. The Circle K in Cottonwood still stands, though it's been renovated since 2002, the security cameras upgraded, the parking lot repaved. But sometimes, on hot June afternoons when the air shimmers above the asphalt, locals say you can still feel something there, a presence, a reminder of the girl who vanished. It's probably just superstition, the way grief manifests in stories and rituals and collective memory. But maybe there's truth in it too. Maybe Sarah's spirit does linger in that place where her life was stolen, not because she's trapped there, but because she wants to be remembered, wants her story to serve as a warning, wants other girls to be careful, to be safe, to make it home to their mothers who are waiting by the phone. Dale Edward Pritchard died in prison in 2019, 5 years into his sentence, of a heart attack. There was no funeral, no mourners. His body was cremated, and his ashes were disposed of according to state protocol. He left no apology, no confession to other crimes, no explanation for why he did what he did. In the end, he was just a monster who'd preyed on the vulnerable, and when he died, the world became a slightly safer place. Sarah's case was officially closed in 2014 with Pritchard's conviction, but it remains open in another sense, in the hearts of those who loved her, in the community that rallied around her family, in the collective memory of a tragedy that should never have happened. Her face still appears sometimes in true crime documentaries, in articles about solved cold cases, in training materials for law enforcement. She's become a symbol, a reminder of the thousands of women who go missing every year, some who are found and some who never are, some who get justice and some who don't. But Sarah Martinez was more than a symbol, more than a case file, more than a sad story. She was a real person with dreams and hopes and a future that was stolen from her. She loved animals and art and her family. She made her grandmother's carne asada recipe and sang along to Selena in her car. She wanted to be a veterinary technician. She wanted to make the world a little better, a little kinder. She was 23 years old when she died, and she deserved to live to be 24 and 25 and 83. She deserved to fall in love, to have children, to grow old, to watch sunsets and paint watercolors and feel the desert wind in her hair. Dale Edward Pritchard took all of that from her in a moment of violence that lasted minutes but echoed across decades. But he couldn't take her memory. He couldn't take the love her family had for her. He couldn't diminish the impact she'd had on the world, brief as her time in it was. Sarah Martinez mattered. She still matters. And as long as there are people who remember her, who speak her name, who tell her story, she will never truly be gone. The porch light at the Martinez house in Phoenix burned for 12 years, every single night, a beacon calling Sarah home. Rosa turned it on the night her daughter disappeared, and never turned it off. Not once, even when hope seemed impossible, even when everyone told her it was time to let go. After Sarah was found and buried, after the trial ended and Pritchard was sent to prison, Rosa finally walked out to that porch one evening at sunset and flipped the switch. The light went dark for the first time in 12 years. Miguel found her there, standing in the dimness, tears running down her face. "I can let her rest now," Rosa said. "I can let her go." But she was wrong about one thing. She never really let Sarah go, none of them did, and that was okay. Because love doesn't end with death. Memory doesn't fade just because time passes. Sarah is still with her family, in the photographs on the walls, in the stories they tell, in the tree planted by the Verde River, in the furniture Miguel builds, in the names of Carmen's children, in the prayers Rosa says each night before she sleeps. Sarah's is in the wind that sweeps across the Arizona desert, in the red rocks that rise toward the sky, in the endless blue above. She is in every young woman who makes it home safely, in every mother who doesn't have to endure what Rosa endured, in every case that gets solved because investigators refuse to give up. The investigation that brought Dale Pritchard to justice took 12 years, but it succeeded because people cared, because a detective named Robert Chen refused to let Sarah become just another forgotten file, because a community rallied and remembered and demanded answers. It succeeded because Rosa and Miguel Martinez never stopped fighting for their daughter, never stopped believing that truth would prevail, that justice would come, that Sarah's life meant something. And it did. It does. It always will. This is the story of Sarah Elena Martinez, 23 years old, who disappeared from a Circle K parking lot in Cottonwood, Arizona on June 14, 2002, and whose body was found 11 years later in the high desert, and whose killer was brought to justice 12 years after he stole her life. This is a story of grief and determination, of a family's love that transcended death, of a community that refused to forget, of justice delayed but not denied. It's a story that should never have had to be told, because Sarah should still be here, should still be alive, should still be making art and loving animals and living the life she deserved. But it did have to be told, because stories like this matter, because the victims matter, because every life lost to violence is a tragedy that ripples outward, touching everyone it reaches. Sarah's story ended in a shallow grave in the desert, but her legacy continues in the lives she touched, in the changes her case inspired, in the other families who got answers because investigators learned from her case. She was loved, she is remembered, and she will never be forgotten. That's not justice, not really, because justice would mean Sarah got to live. But it's something. It's what we have. It's how we honor the dead and protect the living. It's how we make sure that girls like Sarah, who just wanted to go swimming on a hot June day, who just wanted to call their mothers and drive home safe, are remembered not just as victims but as people, as daughters and sisters and friends, as human beings who mattered, who still matter, who will always matter. Rest in peace, Sarah Elena Martinez. The light is off now, but you're home.